This particular video is about evaluating deductive arguments. This is perhaps the most challenging and potentially confusing area of instruction that we'll be doing. You might wonder why we're even doing it. Well, it's part of evaluating logic, and in life and in writing, people use logic, and it's our job to evaluate it. Now, you will, if you are like most people, make a lot of mistakes, but we're going to have some guided practice together, and hopefully that will clear matters up for you. Deductive arguments I'm just going to flip the page. I want to, if you're not on 244, get your book and follow with me. If you haven't read this at least once, just hit pause and read it carefully. I'm not going to insult you by reading it all to you. I'm going to try and amplify and clarify some points. On the next page, we have a good sample, and this is a deductive argument. We have a major premise, which is a generalization. All mothers have children. Leslie is a mother, therefore Leslie has at least one child. That is a valid argument. Validity is not necessarily truth. Validity essentially means there is one answer, and one answer only. That might be a better way of thinking about it. I mentioned before that in induction, where we look at evidence, individual piece of evidence, and make a generalization, we draw a generalization that is the conclusion, and that conclusion is never definite. It's only highly probable. Hopefully it's highly probable, which we call cogent. Once we have generalizations that help us understand the world, then we move over to deduction, and we start using them to make decisions, to make determinations. This premise, this generalization, which is a conclusion inductively, my goodness, we look at mothers, they all have children. It is cogent. In fact, it's almost definite. It's one of the best generalizations we can have. And now in deduction is no longer a conclusion, but becomes a piece of evidence. And we use this evidence, all mothers have children, to size up, if you will, this piece of evidence. Leslie is a mother, and using this and this, we come to the conclusion that tends to be rather specific. It's not a generalization that Leslie has at least one child. Now, that's all good, but the problem is you can use this and come up with one answer and still be wrong. For example, here's another syllogism. That's what these are called in deduction. A syllogism is a little mini argument where we have evidence and a conclusion. But here, this is not valid. Same major premise, all mothers have children. Therefore, Leslie, who has a child, is a mother. So we conclude that this is true, but it's not valid because there can be more than one answer. Leslie may have a child and not be a mother. Leslie could be a dude. I mean, you may not recognize that, but Leslie is also a man's name. My best friend in high school was named Leslie, and he's not the kind of guy you'd want to laugh at because his name was Leslie. So we can't make this conclusion. It's invalid. The reason it's really invalid, what it hinges on, is there can be more than one answer. In deduction, for the argument to be valid, it means there's one answer, ideally. That's really the gist of it. Now, this chart is your best friend, and you'll have another almost best friend a little later in the book that you'll want to mark and use repeatedly. This little chart is quite helpful. It shows you that truth and validity are not the same thing. This first column is what you want in a deductive argument. You want it to be valid and true, which is a sound argument. And here we have a generalization. All cars need fuel. Now don't get goofy. Let's make the reasonable assumption we're speaking of gasoline or fuel cars. We're not of plug-ins. And even those, if you really are honest about it, need fuel. Somewhere down the line, the electricity probably came from fuel. Maybe solar, maybe not, but nonetheless, just play along with me. Well, this is a good generalization. It is pretty cogent. Cadillac's a car. This is the answer we simply must have down here. So it is valid because there's that one answer. And all these premises are true. Now, this is totally silly. This is the product of my friend Rick, who probably spent too much time as a boy playing with Transformers. But here, it's perfectly logical, but it's not true. This generalization is simply not true, but saying it was, okay? All cars can transform into airplanes. This Mustang, by the way, the editor missed that. It wasn't my friend's fault. That should be capitalized. This Mustang is a car. This Mustang can transform into an airplane. The reason this is valid, not true, is because this statement, you can say, if it were true. In this statement, if it were true, this is the answer you must have. Now, another major problem is an argument that is not valid. Valid means it's not logical. That's really what invalid means. Valid means logical, not true, but logical. Invalid means that it is not logical, but sometimes we get lucky. Here, this is a pretty good premise. If a politician doesn't campaign hard, she won't get elected. Barack Obama campaigned hard. Barack Obama got elected. Well, this all happens to be true, but it's not a valid argument. The way we can tell, deductive arguments are used to make a decision. It's not a one and done kind of deal. If this were a valid argument, it should work. This statement, and that's pretty cogent, it's pretty true. If a politician doesn't campaign hard, he or she won't get elected. It should work where we are stuck. We always get the same answer, one answer here. But we could say, okay, this is cogent, generally true. We could plug in here Mitt Romney campaigned hard, and he sure did. But the problem is that's not the answer we got. Barack Obama was elected anyway. So the logic all falls apart, and that's the problem with it. Here, we won't spend too much time with it. It's invalid, and it's just false. It's all silly. All cars need fuel. Okay, that's a pretty good generalization. This is just a silly statement, and John is a car. It's not logical, and it's not true either. So we'll just move on from there. Hopefully that was helpful. Now your book you can study. I won't read it to you because I want to give you some answers where you tried. But this explains it quite well, and if you read it carefully, I think that it will make some sense to you. My friends explained it rather well, and so I'm not going to belabor that. What I want to do is give you the answers in the remaining 7 minutes-ish and explain things. Now, some of these will blow your mind probably, but get over it. Number one is valid. All things that walk have four legs, that is a generalization we just know isn't true. But saying it was, if this were true and this were true, which it happens to be, that is the one answer you must have. Two is invalid. All animals need to eat. Don't get weird on me. We're talking about animals. You know, the kind that bark and whatnot, not ones that communicate, have opposable thumbs, and talk in class. Okay, I know that people are animals, but we'll assume we're speaking of animals, okay? All animals need to eat. That is a generalization that's pretty right on. Reggie needs to eat. We come to the conclusion Reggie is an animal. That's not the only answer we could have. Reggie might be a person. Number three, and later you'll see why this is invalid. Number three is invalid. Everyone who eats too much will get sick. John is sick. He ate too much. Well, people get sick for different reasons other than eating. If you have the COVID thing, it's not because you ate too much, right? So that's just invalid logic. People who love you hug you. He hugged you, so he must love you. That is invalid. Remember that on a Friday night, especially if you've been over imbibing. Just because somebody hugs you doesn't mean that they love you. Okay. Number five, those who commit a crime will be found guilty. John was found guilty, so he must have committed a crime. That is invalid. It's saying that those who commit a crime will be found guilty. John being found, the syllogism is limiting it to that. Those who commit a crime will be found guilty. It's not saying those who are guilty must have committed a crime. 6 is valid. I mean, this is the only condition. Students who regularly attend classes get passing grades. Oliver never skips. so we can conclude he gets passing grades. Because the statement is so limited, don't overthink it, just look at what's actually being said. He has to pass. Okay? A 7, by the way, most moral and political stances tend to be deductive, which means the generalization might be cogent at best. This is a pretty good one, though. But it is valid. Stealing is wrong. That's the major premise. Breeda's friends have been shoplifting, so the conclusion is Breeda should try and tell her friends to quit stealing. 8 is invalid. Okay? It's a good cogent theory that germs cause illness. We have Carl being ill, and we ought to find germs in his body. Well, that is invalid. That's not the only answer we'll have. He could be very sick and not have any germs in his body. That's causing the sickness, at least. 9 is valid. Students who plagiarize get sent to the dean. There's a conditional statement there. The condition is met in the minor premise, so he gets sent to the dean. That's valid. And 10 is another negative sort of spin, but it's a valid argument. Bullies need to be punished. Nelson bullies Bart, therefore Principal Skinner should give him a detention. So that's all valid and good, and we will move on forward with more challenging elements. So hang in there, persevere, catch you in just a bit. Bye.